Okay, I think we can start. So, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar, which will give you an overview of ISO 14001 identification and evaluation of environmental aspects. My name is Pereira da Cruz, and I'm an author at 𝗧𝗿𝗶𝘀𝗲. I do a lot of ISO 14001 consulting and training. Still, I also conduct audits as the lead auditor. So today I will share my thoughts on ISO 14001 identification and evaluation of environmental aspects. My presentation will last approximately uh, 40 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. If you have a question, you don't need to wait for the Q&A session. Feel free to ask it during my presentation by clicking the Q&A icon and submitting your question. Naturally, during the Q&A session, I'll also address your remaining inquiries. And if you click on the chat icon, you can download the PDF handout of this presentation and access links to articles that will be published during it. And later, we will send you an email with a link to the webinar recordings and the list of articles mentioned. Okay, so let's go. So in ISO 14001, the first big step is looking closely at the things that affect the environment around us, around your organization. So this step is super important because it decides what comes next. By understanding these things, a company follows ISO rules and prepares to manage the environment well. It's like making a strong start in being responsible for the environment. Now, this presentation will show different approaches for identifying, I prefer the word determining, and evaluating environmental aspects. So we developed this webinar for anyone involved in the planning, implementation, or auditing of an EMS based on ISO 14001. Now, let's see the agenda. So today we'll discuss the following topics. So I will show you what ISO 14001 requires regarding determining and evaluating environmental aspects. Then we will discuss how to determine the environmental aspects. Then we will discuss how to determine the environmental aspects. Then we will discuss how to determine the environmental aspects and perform that activity. The next topic is how to evaluate environmental aspects and determine those that are significant and how to handle the significant aspects. And at the end, we will discuss the main challenges regarding determining and evaluating environmental aspects based on emails received before this webinar. Okay, so let's go. Let's see what ISO actually requires. So you must determine the environmental aspects of your organization's activities, products, and services within the defined scope of the environmental management system. So you only need to consider the aspects your organization can control and those you can influence. Okay. So as an example, we have in here air emissions, consumption of wood, consumption of energy, and discharge of treated wastewater. Just examples. Now, after that, so you determine the aspects. Okay. That it's like what crosses the border, what crosses the fence between the environment and your organization. And after that, you need to determine the impacts associated with environmental aspects. The environmental aspect is the cause, and the environmental impact is the effect, the consequence. So, for example, air emissions have the potential to generate air pollution. Consumption of wood has the potential to cause deforestation. Consumption of energy has the potential to contribute to climate change. And the discharge of treated wastewater has a potential to generate water pollution. Now, what are the aspects and impacts? So, according to ISO 14001, an aspect is an element of your organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with environment. In contrast, an impact is a change to the environment. An aspect is what you do that can affect the environment, and the impact is what that effect is. Okay, so get the concepts right. Now, let's see some examples. consider the example of a company manufacturing wood furniture, okay? So as examples of direct and under normal operation environmental aspects and impacts, we have what you can see right now in the screen. So consumption of energy, air pollution, climate change. So the consumption of energy, the discharge of treated wastewater, these are environmental aspects that are direct, so depend on your organization and occur in normal situation, okay? But you need also to consider abnormal operating conditions like startup, shutdown, maintenance. You see here, abnormal operating conditions is not the same as emergency, okay? Abnormal is something that we know when this happens, but it's not the normal. It's not the cruise control situation. No, it's during a startup, during a shutdown, during maintenance. Then we have also what can happen during accidents and emergencies, okay? We can think also when we are starting implementing a management system, past activities, so things that we used to do in the past, and there may be some residual or not so residual, but there may be some aspects and impacts from those past activities that are there, still there today. And okay, think also about planned activities or new developments, new or modified activities, products and services. And so this is, for example, sometimes when I'm auditing environmental management systems, I say something like, okay, the EMS responsible is the last one to know that they will have a new product line or that they will have a new warehouse. And so, okay, so they make that decision without first looking into what are the environmental aspects, what are the environmental consequences, the impacts. Yeah. So, and this determination of aspects and impacts should also consider the life cycle perspective. Okay, let's see it. Let's consider the life cycle perspective. When we consider the life cycle perspective, we introduce indirect environmental aspects. Okay, so think of the whole life cycle of that wood used for making the furniture. So harvested from forests, transported to be processed and converted into furniture, transported to a sale point and to a consumer's house, used and having an end-of-life disposal or destination. Now I will show you the difference between indirect and direct environmental aspect. So indirect, in this case, harvesting of wood, is something that is not done by your company, by your organization. It's done by others. So you have no control, but of course you can have some influence. Okay, like for example, only buying wood from authorized places. Okay, so considering the life cycle perspective, the difference between direct and indirect environmental aspects lies in the level of control and influence the organization has over them. So with direct environmental aspects are those resulting from activities, products, or services the organization controls directly. For example, emissions from on-site operations, energy consumption, or waste generation at its facilities. Now, the indirect environmental aspects are those arising from activities, okay? The organization can influence but does not directly control, okay? Such as environmental impacts from suppliers, product used by customers, or end-of-life disposal. So both must be considered in ISO 14001 to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the organization's environmental footprint throughout the life cycle. Okay. Now, I received a question from Vladimir, was asking where to start with this determination of aspects. Okay. So before determining aspects, you must understand how the organization functions, its processes, activities, products, and services. So start from a process map. Okay, this ensures you identify aspects linked to real activities, not theoretical ones. Okay, so map your organization, map the process of the organization. Now, walk through each process, okay, step by step. And for each activity, ask what inputs are used, what outputs are created, what resources are consumed, what leaves the process as waste, emissions, noise, heat, wastewater, packaging, chemicals, and transport. So this prevents gaps and keeps the analysis grounded on or in operational reality. Okay, now don't forget, determine normal, abnormal, and emergency conditions. So ISO 14001 requires looking at aspects arising from normal operations, abnormal situations, and emergencies. Things like spills, fire, chemical leaks, storms. Okay, and remember, don't skip emergency-related risks. They are often the most significant. Okay, now, so we start within our organization. Now we can expand outward to what happens before your processes. So ask, what environmental impacts occur upstream because of what we buy or receive? So consider things like extraction of raw materials, manufacturing by suppliers, packaging you receive, inbound logistics and transportation outsourced processes. So coaters, molders, printers, okay. Energy generation. So if your organization is electricity intensive, so this naturally leads to stronger supply chain management and purchasing controls. Okay. Now, downstream, expand to what happens after your processes. Ask what environmental impacts occur because of what we deliver to customers. So consider things like distribution and outbound logistics, the product in use, so energy use, waste generation, chemicals, maintenance requirements, durability, lifespan, end of life options, so right, recycling, landfill, repurposing. So this perspective is essential for designing environmental objectives that matter. Okay, so we consider both upstream and downstream together with our own activities, products and services. Now, don't forget, consider abnormal conditions and emergency situations. Okay, the life cycle perspective does not replace normal, abnormal, emergency. It integrates with it. Okay, so consider things like supplier failures, customer misuse, transport accidents, spill risk, fire, waste leakage, chemical release, end-of-life contamination events. So these may be upstream or downstream, but you still consider whether you can influence or prepare for them. Okay, so all activities upstream, your own operations, and downstream have aspects and impacts. But there is a difference. Inside your operations, you can identify aspects directly because you do the activity. Upstream and downstream, you often identify impacts first, okay, because you don't see the aspects directly. You only see their consequences and then infer the indirect aspects. Okay, so we start normally, it's easier to start with impacts for these two, and then based on the consequence, infer the indirect aspects. Okay, so let's continue with the standard. Once you determine all the environmental aspects, you need to define their associated environmental impacts. And then you need to determine the significant aspects by using established criteria, kind of a threshold between what is relevant and not so much relevant. And then document it and keep it up to date. Now, I leave here the link for two articles. One is called ISO 14001 Risks and Opportunities versus Environmental Aspects. And the other one is How does product lifecycle influence environmental aspects according to ISO 14001? Okay, now how to evaluate environmental aspects. So choose the methodology. So it's very important to adopt a methodology that gives repeatable and consistent results to determine which of the organization's environmental aspects are significant. Okay, so this methodology for evaluating aspects is like having a sieve, okay, to separate what is relevant, what is really important, from what is not so relevant, not so important. So complex analysis and measurements are typically unnecessary for small, medium enterprises, so a simple ranking process could be used. Determining aspects and impacts should involve people in the organization who are familiar with its activities, products, and services. And consideration should be given to how products are made, used, and disposed of, and how services are delivered. Okay? So if insufficient information is available within the organization, information from external sources like trade associations, regulatory agencies, suppliers, publications, the internet, or consultants can be used, can be thought. Okay? Now, choose methodology, define the criteria. So when determining criteria for the significance, the organization needs to consider criteria for environmental protection, such as scale, scale of the impact, severity, gravity, and duration of the impact, or type, or size, and frequency, or probability or likelihood of environmental aspects. If there are any legal and other requirements, okay, so compliance obligations related with those criteria, with those aspects. So, for example, emission limitations, emission license, regulations. So, and may also use needs and expectations of interested parties, such as the ones related to the organization's values, reputation, like reputation, noise, smell, or visual degradation. It's important to avoid vague criteria that can lead to inconsistent assessments. What we want is something that, if done by different people, will more or less provide the same results. Okay. Now we define the criteria. We can conduct the assessment. So we systematically analyze all activities, products, and services to identify environmental aspects, involve cross-functional teams for comprehensive coverage, avoid overlooking indirect aspects like supply chain impacts, okay? And then we determine the significant aspects. So use your defined criteria to identify significant environmental aspects. So focus on aspects with higher potential impact or risks. Avoid neglecting aspects that may seem minor but have long-term effects, okay? And regularly review and update these aspects, okay? Now, I leave here links for 3 articles. ISO 14001, how to set criteria for environmental aspects evaluation. The other one is 6 ways to deal with significant environmental aspects in your EMS. And the last one is 4 steps in identification and evaluation of environmental aspects. Okay. Now, you will find all of the aspects related documents in our ISO 14001 premium toolkit. Let me show you how it looks like. Okay. So we have here the list of all the documents that we have in the ISO 14001 Premium Documentation Toolkit. So we have procedures, we have forms, we have guidelines. So I will show you this procedure for identification and evaluation of environmental aspects. And I will show you this guideline for wastewater and sewage management as an example, okay? So these documents are Word documents, so they can be customized completely. So procedure for identification and evaluation of environmental aspects and risks. So, and you see here things like what is the methodology, okay, for identification and evaluation, what are the risks and opportunities. And then we have, okay, identification of EMS aspects and their impacts. So kind of a step-by-step here. Evaluation of environmental aspects and their impact. So kind of criteria that can be used, things like probability or frequency or likelihood, scale of impact, time of recovery, so examples. And then how to define in an objective way the significance, okay? And as a guideline, as an example also of a Word document, guideline for waste management. So actions for waste management. So we may have non-hazardous or hazardous waste management, and then we have here the practices. Okay, the sorting and where to segregate, characterization, classification. So yeah, so things like, okay, what are the actions for waste management, the different possibilities for non-hazard waste and for hazardous waste. Then we have what needs to be done. Okay, so as I said, Word document, completely customizable, with some remarks here to help you. So yeah, you can see the details of this toolkit here. So I leave here the link for the toolkit. Okay. And let's go back to the presentation. So we determine the environmental aspects and impacts. We evaluate, we determine what are the significance, okay? And so how we do it in terms of keeping a record of that. An example could be this one, okay? So we have the aspect here and the impact, so volatile organic compounds emissions, the consequences, air pollution or climate change, two possibilities. The situation, so this occurs in a normal situation or in an emergency, like because there's a leak, because there's a spill. Are there any compliance obligations related to? Yes, we have some laws here, law number 1, law number 2. One topic there is there's no law available regarding one part of the emergency risks. Okay, and we evaluate just, okay, based on the requirements of the compliance obligations, are we actually complying with? What is our compliance status? Okay, in the first two, in this example, in the first two, they are negative. In the second two, they are positive. Okay, so now let's do the evaluation. Okay, and it's like this. So if the compliance status is negative, okay, it's automatically significant because we are not, okay, significant by compliance obligations. We are not complying with compliance obligations. So this is relevant. This is very, very critical. Okay, so we don't need to make any more evaluation. It just is enough. But what about the other two, the positive? In that case, we can use something like this, a matrix like this, severity and probability, and we can classify, like, for example, low, medium, low, and the result is, okay, not significant. Okay, and so in some situations, some organizations do something like this. For the severity, they use kind of a classification based on the amount of solvents that they use. So this is based on legislation in my country, because there's different requirements for compliance obligations. If your consumption is below 3 tons per year, the requirements are much less than if it is higher than 5 tons per year. Okay, it's an example. Okay, so this way we put information, we collect information systematically. We systematically put here our conclusions regarding compliance status, regarding significance. Okay, now Cyrilla asked, how to evaluate environmental aspects? So that's an example here. To evaluate environmental aspects, we apply clear and consistent criteria to decide which aspects are significant. So ISO 14001 allows flexibility, okay, but organizations typically use 4 criteria. Okay, I only have here 3, but typically they use this one: the severity, the gravity, okay, how big is the impact on air, water, soil, resources, biodiversity. The other one is, okay, frequency, likelihood, probability. Okay, so how often the aspect occurs under normal, abnormal, and emergency conditions. Okay, um, legal, or compliance relevant, so whether laws, permits, or obligations apply, and we comply with them, yes or no, right now. What I don't have here, but many organizations also use, is the control or influence, so your ability to manage or influence the impact across the life cycle, so score or qualitatively judge each aspect against this criteria. Aspects that exceed your defined threshold become significant and must be controlled, monitored, and linked to objectives, So keep it simple, evidence-based, and consistent, So now, significant. What are we going to do, And this shows that how with a this kind of register we can include almost the whole management system here. So, from the previous slide, and now let's see the remarks for operational control and emergency preparedness and response. So what we see here is something like we need to capture and confine diffuse emissions. Currently, the company is not doing that. One of the reasons they are not complying with legislation. We need to train employees about minimizing diffuse emissions. We need to calculate and verify rules regarding the height and construction of chimneys. There are some rules regarding the minimum height for the chimneys, and they didn't know if they were complying with that, yes or no. And if the chimneys were according to the rules, practiced. We need to calculate, the annual solvent consumption for this example, and based on that consumption, decide what needs to be done. So, for example, can we switch to water-based product, water-based solvent? Can we improve application techniques? Can we use solvent recovery systems? Can we optimize inventory management? Or can we, do we need employee training and awareness? And formalize the monitoring program. So can you see what I'm doing here? I'm not breaking the company into pieces, and putting them through the various clauses of the standard. I'm doing the exact opposite, I'm focused on improving the environmental performance because I'm focused on significance, And what I'm doing is I'm listing what I need to do, to improve my situation, and then I link to the clauses of the standard. I don't do it the other way around. That way I work with things that are concrete, not abstractions. I leave here a link for the article, Understanding the Relationship Between Environmental Aspects and Operational Procedures. Let's focus on this column about the remarks for operational control and emergency preparedness and response. So to handle significant environmental issues, you need a plan. So first, set clear rules and methods, operational controls, to mitigate the impacts of these aspects. So these might include implementing procedures, guidelines, or technologies. Make sure everyone knows what to do by providing training and raising awareness. You see there. This helps build a culture where everyone cares about the environment. And keep an eye on how well things are going. So monitor environmental performance to improve things over time. So by aligning operational controls, training initiatives, and ongoing monitoring, organizations can meet ISO 14001 standard and cultivate a proactive and sustainable approach to environmental management, reducing risks and enhancing overall performance. So this is slide number 13. So the approach presented in slides 12 and 13, this one, prioritizes grounding decisions in the operational reality of the organization. okay? Instead of starting from abstract requirements or theoretical models, so things like, oh, the standard has a clause called 7.2, competence. Okay, we need to provide training. No, it's the other way around. Okay, what kind of training do we need to control, to minimize this significant environmental aspect? And then, oh, there's a clause about that. What are the good practices that are recommended by ISO 14001? Let's apply that. Okay, so instead of starting from abstract requirements or theoretical models, we start with something concrete. So this method means that rather than defining training actions or operational controls based on general environmental themes or standards, okay, the analysis begins with the actual activities, risks, impacts, and behaviors observed in the workplace. So training needs, investments, procedures, and monitoring actions are then derived directly from these concrete findings, leading to more relevant and effective interventions. So by following this sequence, starting from organizational reality and moving towards action, the process ensures that every improvement, every control measure, and new practice is tailored to what is truly happening, okay? Not just what ought to happen in theory, okay? Right, now, okay, so we have a question here from Anna. Is the criteria defined the same for all aspects, or should they be different depending on the aspect? Normally what I do is I follow the criteria normally for small, medium enterprises and for not very complex organizations. I use the same criteria, okay? Things that, as I said before, the probability or likelihood or frequency, if they comply with legislation, yes or no, and the severity, okay, the degree of the impact. It's very simple, but it's most of the time it's enough, okay. What may happen is you may work with an organization that is much more complex, okay, may work in an organization much more complex, that may decide that for some particular situation, like using of some hazardous substances, you need to use a particular different one item of the criteria is different or has a different scale of evaluation. Okay, but that we may use that, but normally not needed. Okay. Let me see if I have any question more from. No, not here. Okay, so main challenges. So based on the questions received by email before this webinar, these are the main challenges for those working with environmental aspects management. Okay, so the evaluation of environmental aspects and their significance. So methods for evaluating environmental aspects without a probability matrix. It's a minus. Think about the criteria for determining significance, where to set the threshold, the limit, and linking significant aspects to environmental objectives and performance evaluation. So to what needs to be improved, and the environmental objectives can evaluate or be used to evaluate the degree of improvement. The integration of environmental risks and opportunities. So for example, in the beginning, I used the example of environmental aspects of the discharge of treated wastewater. And we can say that, okay, normally the organization, in normal situation, the organization discharges the treated wastewater below parameters, acceptable level parameters. So it's everything okay. Pollution, water pollution is minimized, but there may be a risk of that, of some malfunction of the wastewater treatment plant, and so we may be discharging untreated water or not so well treated wastewater, and then we have water pollution. Okay, what is the probability of that from happening? Many times happened in the past. And so look at those environmental risks in that situation, and consider the handling of abnormal situations and practical documentation. So defining and documenting abnormal situations effectively and how to act upon them. Don't forget the simulations and having the means to prevent, means to response. Yeah. So I leave here a link for an article called Diagram of 6 Steps in ISO 14001 Environmental Aspects Management. Okay? Now, so to conclude, identification and evaluation of environmental aspects is one of the most crucial steps in implementation of environmental management system. And if it is not done properly, the rest of the system won't work and the EMS will not be effective, because actually this is the base for everything. Okay, when I work in my consulting work, even the policy is done after this, because then the policy will include some mention about the most relevant environmental aspects. And to know, and I must first do this to know what are the most relevant ones. Okay, and to help you with all that, you can use 𝗥𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀 ISO 14001 Premium Documentation Toolkit. Here's the link with more details, okay? And I'll also send you now the meeting link to schedule a call with our toolkit expert. He'll explain you how toolkit works, okay? And show you any document you'd like to see, okay? So here's the link. Now, let's go to the Q&A. Oops. Well, let's go to the Q&A. Yep. So before we begin with the question and answer session, just to mention that you can also ask me anything about ISO 14001 directly. Just send me an email and I'll answer as quickly as I can. And if you have to leave before this Q&A session is over, please fill in the short survey that will open right after you leave the webinar. Okay. So, and I leave here links for our courses. So ISO 14001 Foundations course, the one about the standard. The lead implementer course, so the one about implementing ISO 14001 in your company, and the internal audit course and the lead auditor course. Okay. Now, some questions here. Sibuzu asked before the webinar, step-by-step of ISO 14001 implementation. Okay, since this is not specifically about this webinar, so Sibuzizo, please check this article that I include here now. Okay, list of ISO 14001 implementation steps. Okay, so you can see there. Now, Andrew asks, how easy is to integrate with ISO 13485? Now, I think it's very easy to integrate with ISO 13485 because ISO 14001 and ISO 9001 are very easily integrated, and with with ISO 13485 is also easy to integrate. Okay, so there may be some, it's not exactly following the same high-level structure, but the same clauses are there. I remember what, for example, I think it's clause 5.4 is about the objectives for ISO 13485. Okay, in ISO 14001 is clause 6.2, but you have the policy, you have the training or the competence, you have the awareness, you have the document and records, you have non-conformities, although we have different kinds of non-conformities here, corrective actions, internal audits, management review. So yeah, it's easy. Okay, I think it's easy. Okay. So Digging Dlela asked how AI impacts ISO 14001 environmental aspects, identification and evaluation. Okay, so AI improves environmental aspects identification by making it more complete, more consistent, and more evidence-based. It can analyze processes, data, inputs, and outputs to detect aspects that might otherwise be overlooked, so like energy patterns, waste trends, abnormal events. AI also strengthens evaluation by providing quantitative insights into magnitude, frequency, and risks, reducing subjectivity. Yeah. However, AI does not replace the organization's responsibility to define aspects, understand its processes, or make significant decisions. So it enhances the process. It does not own the process. Sorry. So Leah asked, is it better to incorporate the environmental aspects and impacts with the risk register or keep them separate? I like to keep the environmental aspects and impacts register separate because ISO 14001 requires specific detailed evaluation that the generic risk register cannot support. Okay. However, any significant environmental risks, okay, I'm not speaking about the organizational risk, but the environmental risks, including those related to emergency situations, should be transferred to the organization's wide risk register so top management can see and manage them. Okay. Phyllis asked, should the aspects and impact, risk, and opportunities register capture all the departments at the different levels? Yes, but only if those departments perform activities that create environmental interactions, okay? The register should reflect relevant activities, okay, not organizational charts. So the register should not include departments or levels just for the sake of completeness. So if they don't have any environmental interactions, we don't need to include them, okay? Another question here. Anna asked, if the organization's activities remain stable, why should the aspects register change? And how do we keep it up to date without reinventing it every year? So Anna, this reminds me, you know, that the Red Queen, okay, the Red Queen, they saying that in the story, saying that we need to run just to stay in the same place. Okay, and here is the same. So the process may stay the same, but the risks, the legal requirements, the performance, the technology, and context do not. Okay, so a live matrix means a register that evolves as legal requirements change, operational performance changes, monitoring reveals incidents or trends, stakeholders raise new expectations, new controls are implemented, impacts become more or less significant, suppliers change products or practices, downstream use or disposal issues emerge. So in other words, the matrix must reflect the current reality, even if operations look identical on paper, okay? Anna asked, when the identification of aspects and impacts is performed and no changes happens in the organization process, how do we maintain the matrix since no changes are happening? I think that there must be some changes happening, okay? Because you took the first picture, okay? Check, took the first picture. That shows how old I am, because I just do this like the old cameras, check, not like the smartphone. Okay, but you take the picture, okay, and you realize that there are some things that need to be improved because the aspects are significant. And so with operational control, you improve the situation. Now, if you need to update the evaluation of the aspects, and you'll realize that some aspects that were significant last year now are not significant because now you are complying with compliance obligations, because now the air emissions are much lower, because your company now is much more efficient, because now you use you are recycling much more, because you are not sending to landfill so much waste. So there's always, it's mandatory to have to see some changes, because if there are no changes, so what you did with your operational controls were not effective. Okay, were not effective. Lucky asked, must the organization identify and document all its environmental aspects, and how often must it be updated? Okay, so you must try to take that picture, make that assessment of all your environmental aspects. Okay, but don't be too obsessive with that. Do your due diligence work. Okay, but if anything is missing, perhaps it's not so relevant because it passed your radar. And next year, if you repeat this next year, perhaps you will find it. Okay, so do your due diligence, but don't be obsessed with that, with finding everything. Okay, and how often must it be updated? So I like to do this at least once per year. Okay, unless there are, for example, unless the organization decides to make some changes, deliberate changes. So a new product line, a new department, a new area. Okay. So in that sense, we should update our evaluation to be prepared for what comes new. Okay. Yeah. Let me show you here. So we have here another. Okay, here. Hem asked, what is the best way to document environmental aspects? Okay, this is my way. I do not say that this is the best way, but the most effective way to document environmental aspects is to create a structured, consistent, and register that connects what? Each activity, product or service, and don't forget the life cycle perspective, okay? Its environmental aspects, okay? What interacts with the environment, the associated environmental impacts, what may change in the environment, reflect normal, abnormal, and emergency conditions. So link aspects to legal and other requirements. The criteria used to evaluate significance. The controls already in place. Oops, sorry. The controls already in place. Okay. The monitoring of KPIs already existing, and okay, and then at the end, what actions are required to reduce significant risks or significant impacts, or yeah. So this type of register is usually presented in a single table or matrix because it provides a clear line of sight between operations, risks, controls, exactly the transparency ISO 14001 expects. Okay, so yeah. Another question is from Catherine. Catherine asked, how can very small, not-for-profit or public service organizations, say 5 to 20 employees, implement ISO 14001 or work toward implementing something close to it? Okay, so very small, not-for-profit or public service organizations can implement ISO 14001 by keeping it simple and focusing on the essentials. The standard scales extremely well, okay? The main activities are understand your context and stakeholders, okay? Who cares, determines who cares about your environmental performance, the community, donors, regulators, users. Determine your environmental aspects and impacts, okay? Decide what is significant. Use simple criteria, okay? Legal duties, impact, frequency, stakeholder concern. Set 2 or 3 achievable environmental objectives. Define basic operational controls. So simple procedure for waste handling, procurement, energy use, storage of chemicals, you know. ensure competence and awareness, so train staff on their environmental responsibilities, monitor performance, few indicators, energy bills, waste volumes, recycle rates, and conduct an annual internal review, a mini audit to check what's working and what needs improving, and engage leadership. So management must support decisions and allocate minimal resources. So in very small organizations, the key is not bureaucracy, but clarity. Know your impacts, control them, and improve a little each year. Okay? So there's another question here from Florian. Is there a best practice to connect aspects and the corresponding objectives of the United Nations? Florian, I cannot help you there because I'm not used to, I'm not used to use this very frequently, these corresponding objectives of the United Nations, and I don't remember them now. Okay, so yeah, that's the truth. Okay, let's see here. I think all the questions were answered. Yep. Okay, so as I mentioned, this 1-hour webinar was intended to give overview of the process approach, using the process approach for the identification of environmental aspects and impacts, and then evaluating what are the significant ones and acting upon them. So you can ask me anything about ISO 14001 directly by email. You can also download this presentation deck from our website or take a look at video tutorials and documentation templates. We'll send you the email with all necessary links. So after this webinar, you'll see a short survey, so I will kindly ask you to spend a minute to fill it in. The recording of this presentation will be available in a few hours. You'll receive a link to the recording. That will be all. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions, and I hope you enjoyed